Today's episode is brought to you by Scientist.com, the life science industry's leading R&D orchestration platform. Scientist.com gives researchers instant access to thousands of pre-vetted suppliers, saving time, reducing costs, and accelerating innovation.
Hi, I'm John Gagliano, Senior Director of BioPharmCatalyst.
Hello, I'm Sheff, known as Sheff Station, a 20-year vet in trading biotech stocks.
And this is Biotech Bulls and Breakthroughs. BioPharmCatalyst is not a registered investment advisory firm, and the views on this podcast are not intended to be financial advice. Guests on this podcast may hold the stocks discussed in personal or other investment accounts. This content is for informational purposes only and should not be considered investment advice. Always do your own research before making any investment decisions. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where and when you're joining us from. Welcome once again to another episode of Biotech Bulls and Breakthroughs. Today is Tuesday, March 24th, 2026. We are very, very close, about 7 days away from the end of the quarter. Certainly been a very exciting quarter. And as always, we're really excited to have Sheff back on with us this month to discuss kind of his views on the market and what catalysts we have coming up before the end of the quarter and into next quarter, and what he's excited about. So Sheff, welcome back, man, as always.
Thank you. This has been a great, it's been a great year already. And even with volatility that we're seeing, we still see good data gets rewarded. And, we're seeing that as we near the end of the first quarter. It's been pretty strong.
Absolutely. I think there's been a lot of talk in the news lately about this kind of idea of selective optimism, so to speak. So kind of like the idea that, things have obviously, the XBI has done extremely well in, this past month. We've seen a little bit more volatility. And if you take a look at what the analysts have to say, a lot of them kind of feel that it's not really a market crash, but just sort of general pullback, we'll say. And, given some of the uptick that we've seen in M&A activity as well as IPO activity, I think that there's a general consensus that the days of the biotech winter are kind of behind us. Even if we do experience some volatility, that's obviously going to be the case. We've got a lot of, geopolitical things going on. And so you're going to have a little bit of that no matter what industry or sector you look at, inclusive of, the S&P 500 itself. So I think we're in a really good spot. Obviously for us, we're always paying attention to the catalysts. I know you are, Sheff, but just kind of wanted to get your thoughts on where we're at right now, and just see how you're feeling as we kind of go into the end of the quarter.
Absolutely. Just going off what you were talking about, I think the other thing now is that the biotech sector and Piper Jaffray and Goldman and a lot of these firms have talked about this as well. Biotech, as well as pharma, is looked at now as being more of a defensive sector. Reason being, because you have traditional businesses that have always done well in terms of investing that are now getting hit because of the concern around AI. And so healthcare is always going to be there. We're always going to see development in biotech and pharma. I think that AI, and we're seeing this, is going to enhance the speed at which these clinical trials are brought to the market. But biotech is here to stay. And so whether you're looking at big pharma and you're looking for cash-paying dividend stocks, like Johnson & Johnson, Merck, Pfizer, Lilly, or you talk about biotechs that are small, mid-cap, that larger firms are looking to acquire, the money has to be put somewhere, and it's going to be put in biotech and pharma as we move forward.
Well, it is kind of interesting, right? The fact that you sort of have this industry within the broader healthcare like healthcare, to your point, has always been considered a defensive sector because it's a necessity, right? Like we kind of identify, it's almost like needs versus wants when we think about defensive versus cyclical sectors, right? And so for biotech, you know, it's interesting because it is so volatile, but it sits within the defensive sector. But now, to your point, we are definitely seeing that shift where itself, with this kind of small industry, the smaller industry within the broader sector, is also shifting to sort of mirror what we've seen in the sector as a whole. I definitely agree with that.
Yeah, we're seeing that, and like you said, we're seeing the smaller companies get weeded out. If you're a
Yeah,
smaller company and you have products that clearly don't fit within, the product line of a larger company, you're not going to be sustainable because you're not going to have the cash position. You're not going to have partnerships. You're not going
yeah.
to be able to have things that help sustain you and move you from a small cap to a mid cap to a larger cap. And so, we're seeing a lot of these companies get weeded out, and we've seen that happen over the last 5 to 10 years. But specifically, as this year, pushes through, we'll see more and more.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I know that we wanted to touch on as well, kind of a big deal, is this idea of the new, the FDA passed some new, I guess, sort of uh, guidelines around this idea of a one pivotal trial. And I wanted to just kind of get your thoughts on that, what that means, because I think, we both agree that it can be, it's likely going to be fairly significant in the way that in terms of what companies are required to do in terms of going through the FDA, and obviously for Catalyst it's going to be significant as well. So do you want to just kind of walk us through what occurred and what changes are taking place, and then what that means?
Absolutely, and it's really interesting and dynamic that it's occurring now. The reason being is because obviously, the New England Journal of Medicine, came out with an article, talking about the fact that Vinay Prasad, who is the director at CBER, and then you have Martin Macri, who is the FDA commissioner. They, came together. They co-authored this update through the New England Journal of Medicine on February 18th, and basically it talked about this one pivotal trial policy update, and basically talks about one pivotal trial is the new default option for the FDA approval, ending this two trial dogma, they call it. And that's going to send ripples throughout biotech, and the reason being is because a lot of these smaller and mid-cap biotechs don't succeed because they have to do two clinical trials. And if you're doing two phase 3 studies, those phase 3 studies can go from 2.5 to 3 years. And so if you're doing two, you know, you're going out 6 to potentially 7 years. And so when you don't have a product on hand and you're trying to move through that production of getting a product to market and working with large pharma, it gets very difficult.
Yeah,
So one trial, and we'll talk through some of these the picks, and the stocks that I'll be discussing today. A lot of them have had one successful study, and then the second study hasn't been successful. And then they're going for a third study to have the two trial. But now with this in play, they can look and say, well, we've already got one successful study, so we'll take the totality of the evidence. Maybe we didn't hit primary endpoint in the second study, but we were statistically significant in the secondary endpoint, which is just as important as the first endpoint for this clinical disease. So there's going to be a lot of opportunity, I think, moving forward for biotechs who in the past would have been done after failed or two failed studies, not even two failed, one failed study mainly, and low on cash. They'll be able to move forward and have some potential to still get their product approved.
yeah. I mean, that's huge, especially for, especially when we talk about some of these catalysts, right? When we're thinking about some of these, particularly to your point, the nano, the micro, the small cap, the mid cap stocks, right? That where their catalysts are significant, they might only have one drug, right? In some of these cases, and that's going to be able to help them move the needle. Obviously, we both know, and most of the listeners on the call know. I mean, the getting through the FDA approval process is one of the most challenging things just kind of period, right, for businesses to do. And compared to what we see globally, right, the FDA, you're talking 10 to 15 years from IND filing to approval in a lot of cases. So this is going to cut that time down. And to your point about the cash runway, most of these companies are, pre-earnings. They are relying on funding and cash, and the smaller ones only have so much. So that's a very big deal for them to not have to be able to bypass that to some degree.
Absolutely. And the statement, this is the defining statement that they discussed, that there's no gray area. It pretty much tells you what they're going to do moving forward. It says,
Yeah.
from Martin Macri, going forward, the FDA's default position is that one adequate and well-controlled study combined with confirmatory evidence will serve as the basis of marketing authorization of novel products. And I think right there, it pretty much says it all, what's going to happen moving forward. But I do want to give an interesting caveat to this, because um, Prasad has always been, very confrontational when it comes to having two clinical studies. So the fact that he helped along with Martin Macri, and that he, just announced his resignation in March, it's going to be, really interesting to see, when he comes out at the end of April, moving forward, whether this new individual that they hire is going to have, a lot different ideology in terms of, clinical studies moving forward. But I don't think it's going to change what's already been put in place. So it's pretty good.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, definitely something that to pay attention to for everyone on the call for sure, to see how that plays out and how that changes the landscape. So appreciate you walking us through that, Sheff. That's super important. Um, let's jump over to the most exciting part of the call always, which is the catalyst portion. So Sheff, do you want to talk us through a little bit? I know we've got a ton going on. We had a ton going on last episode, and the same if not more on this episode. So would love to hear your thoughts as we come to the end of the quarter on what's happening currently and what you like in the future here.
Absolutely.
If you find the information that Sheff is presenting on this podcast useful and would like to gain more insights into his trading strategy for individual tickers, you can donate to this charity, the Northwest Association for Blind Athletes, and all individuals donating $300 or more get full access to his VIP private X account. Founded in 2007, the Northwest Association for Blind Athletes is a national leader dedicated to improving the quality of life for children, youth, and adults through participation in sports and physical activity in communities across Washington, Oregon, Idaho, and Montana. NWABA's programs focus on helping people who are blind build confidence, gain self-esteem, develop friendships, and reach their greatest potential. You can donate by clicking on the link at the bottom of our podcast page, www.BioPharmCatalyst.com/podcast, or via the link in the YouTube video description. All right, so we're going to move on to the more exciting or most exciting piece of the podcast always, which is our Catalyst segment. So, Sheff, it'd be great if you want to walk us through what you're seeing, between now and end of quarter, and then obviously into next quarter, since we're already up on the end of coming up on the end of March. I know we've got a lot of catalysts upcoming, and would love to hear your thoughts on what you're tracking. So
Absolutely.
take it away.
Absolutely. Let's start with the near term March catalyst. There's a company called CNTB, Connect Biopharma. They've got phase 3 results that are going to be presented on at the American Academy of Dermatology meeting, March 27th through the 31st. But they're going to be presenting, I believe, on the 28th. But it's basically phase 3 study of rademikibart in moderate to severe dermatitis. And it's actually moderate to severe atopic dermatitis, but it's by the company's partner from China called Simcere Pharmaceutical. But that's going to be significant. So that's going to be later on this week. So I wanted to make sure that was discussed. I don't have a position there, but with it being a pending information, it's really key to note. My top pick for the first half of the year and my favorite play is Unicisive. They've got their PDUFA date. That's ticker symbol UNCY. And again, they had one CMC issue that was addressed. They're in they've got oxalanthium carbonate, and for phosphatemia. And the main thing with this is that the street and investors need to understand there was no deficiency in OLC's initial filing package, and thus the resubmission, only consisted of an updated cover page. So, it's important for people to note accordingly, the third-party manufacturing vendor, that the issue was with when they got the CRL, has made substantial progress to mitigate the compliance issue. And so, basically, rather than going with another manufacturer, they just stuck with the current one that they had. So it's just simply a matter of resubmitting the application with no new data, where the only change is on the cover page, where they'll say the original vendor is now in compliance. And that's how simple that Unicyce have talked about the issue being with the FDA. So I like their chances there. Obviously, it's a top play. They've got plenty of cash. It's a huge market. Once they get approved, it's going to set everything into play for them to be a TDAPA user, which is another opportunity for them to get approved by all kinds of insurances, and they're one of few companies that'll have that. But Unicisive right now, it's about 650. 640, 650. Many price targets, upwards of $30, $40. HC Wainwright, Piper, it's their pick of the year. And they see it as a potential takeover target because the market is so big for this OLC product that they have. So again, UNCY. The other one is that we should be hearing about is OSTX. That's OS Therapeutics. And recently, last week, they had their meeting with the FDA elevated from a D meeting to a B meeting, which basically means that their biomarker data that they submitted, the FDA elevated that to say that they believe that biomarker data is going to help them to get accelerated approval, which if they get accelerated approval after submitting the data at the end of March, that's accelerated approval. They are hoping and working with the FDA to get that done before September 30th. Because with that accelerated approval comes a priority review voucher, which obviously vouchers now are valued anywhere from $175 to $225 million. The company has a market cap of $35 million. And obviously, they have their product for osteosarcoma in dogs. And that's going to be significant. So I own that one. I like it a lot. I mentioned I own UNCY. Those are plays that I really think are transformative in terms of what they bring. And so OS Therapeutics is one to watch. Of course, they're completing their clinical data package targeting the end of first quarter, and then they're going to meet in early April with the FDA. Let's look at Pali, ticker symbol PALI. And Palisades, Piper Sandler is big on this company. They have an overweight with a price target of $25. It's a great company to own ahead of their Pali 2108 phase 1B fibrostenotic Crohn's disease data, which should be any day. The shares, look to be undervalued right now. They're under $2. Considering that the PDE4 inhibition is already validated in inflammatory bowel disease. So, Piper tells investors, that their firm thinks that Pali has shown profound benefits across clinical remission and response rate in a small phase 1B ulcerative colitis trial. So, they've got a ton of cash, and so, well over 50 million. So they're really strong right now. A phase 1B could it's significant for the company, I think, in this in this disease state. So it'll be interesting to see. I own a small amount of Pally, because the data is nearing, and so I don't want to go big into it, but I do like the risk reward there. PYPD, Polypid, and PYPD, they're awaiting NDA submission at the end of March. And then they've already discussed as early as a call last week that they had, that with one of the buy side firms, that they're going to be announcing a partnership with a big surgical company that's going to help them bring that to market. So once they submit, they've already got breakthrough designation, so they're expecting to have priority review as well. But I own this stock because of the partnership that they've talked about that's imminent once they submit that NDA data at the end of March. So the CEO has had two of those conferences calls. They had one in February, and then they had one in March, I believe, with Cowen. And so I like PYPD. Let's look at GUTS, GUTS. That stock is, so it's GUTS, it's Fractal Health. It's around 43, 44 cents. They just had their earnings, and they confirmed that, and what I wanted to hear is that, they are moving away from their PMA, the pre-marketing authorization application. They're moving more towards a de novo. And the de novo is easier to get through the FDA. The reason being is because de novo relies on safety and tolerability and not necessarily efficacy for the Revita procedure in patients who progress on GLP-1s. And so basically this space is going to get hot again, I believe. They've got data at the end of second quarter for the REVEAL study. Actually, it's the REMAIN study. So it's an open label study that had good success in December. That was at the 6-month mark. And so now in June, that will be the year mark. So we're expecting data at the end of June for the REVEAL study, which was open label data. And then we just got feedback on the de novo application, which bodes well for them towards the end of the year. So the company also has cash through the end of October. And, right now they are, at 40 cents. They've got several catalysts, and they have a nice pipeline as well. So I like the risk reward there, and I definitely own that stock at 40 cents due to the fact that they do have enough cash to get them almost through the end of the year. So let's look at Silo, SILO. Silo Pharma. They've talked about they're going to have data in early 2026. I'm expecting it to be in April. Yeah, first quarter is already gone, and they talked about early 2026. But they have about $4 million in cash, but they have very low cash burn rate, so they have 13 months of cash, and they just did a $1 million buyback. The directors and board of directors are buying back shares of the company, which is a good sign. And then basically over the last 2 months, you've seen, two 13Gs filed for institutional investors coming in. So the stock's at 34 cents, 35 cents. And with those pending catalysts, I think it bodes well for them. Book value per share is 48 cents. Total cash per share is about 44 cents per share. So I like where the stock is at there at 35 cents. No chance of a reverse split. There's not been a pre-14A filed, and obviously with the share buyback, that's pretty strong for Silo. The next one is Vistagen, ticker symbol VT. So Victor, Tom, Gary, Nancy. And it seems like the cat's out of the bag when as Vistagen CEO talked about what happens with this new FDA policy in place, this one trial policy. Obviously their Palisade 2 study was successful, Palisade 3 was not successful, and the stock took a huge hit, like an 80% hit. It went from $6 down to 80 cents. Now it's down the 60-cent range. Company has ton of cash, like over $50 million in cash, and they basically they've talked about if Palisade 4 hits, they'll go with the traditional 2-trial FDA application. But if Palisade 4 is a miss, they'll use the 1-trial approach that the FDA has talked about because they were successful there. And then they'll use the open label data that they have in Palisade 4 to bring in some secondary endpoint data and go to the FDA. So where they are right now is strong because they also have a pipeline where they're expecting an IND at the end of June in it's like female. I forget specifically what it is, but it's it's an IND that's expected at the end of June in another disease type. They've got a solid pipeline of products, and so we'll see what happens there. But again, what we're expecting there is we're expecting an IND at the end of June. We're expecting Palisade 4 data at the end of June, and then they're also a diamond sponsor at the Anxiety and Depression Conference, which is April 9th through 11th. So we may hear more on their social anxiety drug there as well. So keep that in mind. The next ticker is OVID, Ovid Therapeutics. That stock has done really well from the 140 area. It's up well over 2. And their 7 milligram dose of OV329 demonstrated favorable safety and tolerability profile, which sent the stock moving higher. Now, the next catalyst for this company is they're going to host their KCC2, which is another product that they have in their expansive pipeline of products. It's their KCC2. It's a focused research and development day on April 14th. And so I think that's going to bring a lot of investor interest because, everyone knows right now that what's being looked at is their OV329, which is, obviously they've reinforced their best in category potential for refractory epilepsies. They've advanced their plans to initiate a phase 2 trial in focal onset seizures and an open label proof of concept study with OV329. And that was supported by a recent $60 million private placement that included RA Capital Management, ADAR Capital, and several institutional investors that got the price to where it is. Investors saw that there was confidence being put into the company, through institutional investors, so they definitely drove the price up to $240 and higher. So that's definitely one to watch. GRCE, they've got a PDUFA date. That's Grace Therapeutics. That's one to watch because it's less than a month away. They've got a PDUFA date on April 23rd for GTX-104, which is an aneurysmal subarachnoid hemorrhage. And I have a small position there. That's not one that I would hold through data. And the reason being is because I'm not sure what they've done in terms of their manufacturing. And we've seen time and time again how manufacturing can oftentimes be an impediment to a ticker symbol or a company, actually, not a ticker symbol, but a company getting a drug approved. So, but that's one that has really shown significant appreciation into the run-up or into the PDUFA date. Last about 2 or 3 weeks ago, it was in the $3 range, and now we're seeing it near $4.50, even as the markets have been challenging here over the past month, the overall markets. Let's look at PMN, Promise Neurosciences. They did a reverse split. That stock used to be, 40 cent stock. They did a reverse split. They've got about 1 million shares outstanding, 1.5 million, actually, I think it's 2 million outstanding and about 1.5 million in the float. They've got data in the second quarter, phase 1 biomarker data in Alzheimer's. And so it could be substantial if they hit. I don't own it. I don't own that stock. I'm looking at it because it is phase 1. It is biomarker. It's in my wheelhouse there. I try to steer away from phase 3. And I talked about that on the last call with Quince Therapeutics. They had done, they failed on a study, and then the other study was the exact same study with a better patient population for them, and they still failed. So I stay away from the phase 3. I work in the bread and butter area, the phase 1, phase 2, pharmacokinetic, biomarker, the SAD and MAD data, the single ascending dose with the SAD, and then the multi-ascending dose studies, which oftentimes hit. So that is one in the second quarter. So keep an eye on that one. The one that I've been trading in and out, those on my thread, they've seen, I bought TOVX I bought TOVX at 17 cents. Yesterday, it got to a high of 28 cents. They had announced a positive, which we were looking for with this catalyst. They had announced a positive into phase 2 meeting with the US FDA regarding the design of their phase 3 trial of VCN-01 in metastatic pancreatic ductal adenocarcinoma. And so there's not a lot for pancreatic cancer, but the fact that they are, have that clinical study, they have the design out of the way with the FDA, and then there is a catalyst upcoming, and that catalyst is, and you had to go through the earnings to kind of see it, but it was it's the Virage phase 2 study that's been accepted for poster presentation at the American Association of Cancer Research. And that meeting's the 17th to the 22nd. So being that the stock has 15 million in cash, very little debt, they have a partnership, which with Raysana Therapeutics, where they receive 300,000 up front at signing, and they have the potential for 38 million in royalties. So they've got a partnership. They've got a design with the FDA that they've clearly mapped out and come to an agreement on, and then they have data from this study that's going to be presented at AACR. Makes for a good trading opportunity. Yesterday it went from 17 to 28 cents. And then right toward the end of the day, it traded near 21 cents. Today it opened at 20 cents, rebought, and now I think it closed at around 21, 22 cents. But I think that'll get some momentum into it moving forward. So that's TOVX. The other one is CING. CING has a PDUFA date in May. They have 12 million in cash. We're a few months out from that, but I think we saw that stock go from $6 to $11, and it's since retraced back into the $6.97 range, which said $6.71. So we'll see what it ends up doing, but it's one to keep on radar because it's definitely a low floater there. Let's look. I've got a few more. Let's look at ALZN, Alzamend, Apple, Larry, Zebra, Nancy. Head-to-head studies of AL001 versus marketed lithium carbonate, which will compare lithium blood and brain to brain structure pharmacokinetics and bipolar disorder in type 1 patients. So that data, that top-line data from the clinically completed lithium in brain imaging study in healthy subjects is expected by the end of March. So that's probably going to happen at the end of this week. Again, I don't own that one, but I'm looking at it because I do like that it's pharmacokinetic data. And I think they're going to be looking for any positive signs that their AL001 versus a marketed lithium carbonate is better. And I don't think they're looking for statistical significance since it's a pharmacokinetic study. They're looking for safety and tolerability and signs of efficacy. So that could end up boding well for the stock if they meet those markers.
Yep.
Let's look at Rocket. Rocket is supposed to be approved, not necessarily approved, but it's supposed to. Yeah, the PDUFA date is the 28th. So I think that if it gets approved, it'll have to happen on the 27th because the 28th of March is coming up. So Rocket, I'm not owning that. I know initially I was really positive on it, but I'm looking at what I'm seeing with the FDA. ALDX had another situation where they had done, the FDA had asked for, before this new, before this new law was passed that they just talked about, not necessarily law, but this new FDA guidelines was passed, they would go with the 2 studies. Well, FDA asked for a new study. ALDX gave them new information that they had from a new, smaller study, and they still got a CRL on March 16th. So Rocket, even though they only had a CMC issue, there was still something in there that I've looked at in their clinical study that looked like it might not pass the muster. So I have basically said, hey, you know what? I'm going to leave Rocket alone. I played the run up, and right now I'm just going to see what happens. And then there's 3 more to look at as we wind down on time. IFRX, they have an oral presentation on March 28th. They have $46 million in cash, and that's one that we should be hearing about soon. ONCY has new data that's being presented at AACR. They're going to meet with the FDA in mid-April to align on a design of a single-arm study in squamous cell anal carcinoma, which there's nothing for. So ONCY is one to look at. And then 2 others, GNPX, they're going to announce positive data, preclinical data to be presented at AACR, and then PSTV, which is Plus Therapeutics, is going to be presenting data on May 17th at the IPSOR meeting. So those are small cap stocks that all have cash. They have a good balance sheet, but they have data that I think investors can look forward to. So it's going to be chock full of data, John. It's great stuff, and I feel like it's March Madness in biotech.
Yeah. Absolutely, man. Well, that was awesome as usual. Thank you so much for walking us through all of that. And really appreciate all of the insights as we come here to the end of the quarter, and we're going to have more to come in April. So appreciate all the listeners and the viewers on the call and your guys' support. As I mentioned to Sheff earlier, I think we hit like 150,000 views on the last episode. So we're really excited that we're getting that much viewership and people are continuing to engage. So like I said, continue to comment, to like the videos, to subscribe. We do our best to acknowledge all the comments and to answer them if you have any questions. And Sheff, thank you very much as usual for all your insight. And
Awesome.
we will see everyone again next month.
Thank you so much. Take care, John. See you later, everyone.